Hi, this is Anthony, parent of IRSMedic, and thanks for joining us today. We're going to have a little bit of a different discussion today. We often talk about U.S. taxation and its terrible effects around the globe, and you know what? That's honestly a hard topic for most people to get interested in because the tax code is so complicated and it seems so inevitable. People just don't want to talk about it, but it impacts everything they do, and the United States of America gets away with way too much because of the way the system is. But today we want to talk about Julian Assange, because as I read this story, I can't help but see the parallels between what the United States of America is doing to Julian Assange and anyone who wants to blow the whistles on their abuses, and our tax system and our monetary systems. And it basically comes down to something like this, that the United States of America wants to extend the jurisdiction of the United States of America to everywhere in the world. I think one of the greatest essential fact of the Julian Assange case is this: Julian Assange is not an American person at all. He's Australian, and he published damaging information of the United States government. Yet the United States government wants to charge him under the Espionage Act, as if he was an American person who was spying on America. But he's not. Again, he's Australian, and yet it's a weird situation. We're having Australia allowing this to happen, not really defending their own citizen, which seems a little bit weird, and there's some rumblings that they may. And we also have the UK sort of doing whatever the will of the United States government is. Now, today there is a hearing. I believe there's a hearing on the extradition, and we're going to be John Richardson. We're going to be talking about this along with Keith Redmond. And Keith is Keith helps Americans around the world with global taxation, and John is one extrajudicial or extraterritorial. So we're going to get into this. So good morning, gentlemen. Good morning to you, John. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you, Anthony?
Good morning. All right. I'm doing all right here. So I want to get into this story here. And again, this is sort of what struck me as interesting, is that as I'm reading through this, I noticed that the Espionage Act was first put into law in 1917 and during World War I. And the people who voted for it are all the same people who voted for the Federal Reserve Act and the Federal Income Tax Act of 1913. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of weird. That's kind of weird because what we found out is that the U.S. income tax doesn't define individual, but rather leaves that up to the regulations. And a point that John made, I don't know, a year or two to me was this. He goes, Anthony, if the U.S. Treasury wanted to make every person in the world a U.S. taxpayer, they can simply do it through the regulations. John, am I getting your quote right? Am I getting your statement right?
Well, the sentiment of it is clearly right, for the very simple reason that the U.S. tax code refers to individuals, not residents, right? And individuals is, in its plain terms, far, far greater than residents. And the only way to escape the Internal Revenue Code is to be a non-resident alien, right? Making non-resident aliens,
right? I think that, yeah,
of the 21st century, right?
And that, yeah. I mean, that's what. So I see it very, very, the very similar things. And I have this article up. The New York Times posted it yesterday. This person is all against, and I'm not going to get into, there's a whole. For their everyday activities, and people who aren't even American. And by the way, the espionage was a wartime power. And I'm trying to figure out, like, well, what war was declared? What war are we under right now? Where are we? Why is this act even relevant? How are people missing this? This is a wartime act of spying. And Mr. Assange wasn't engaged in any spying. He was just engaged in releasing information. He wasn't engaged in finding secrets and then spreading disinformation. He wasn't spying. He was just getting information and reporting. And so now we have it. It's like, yeah, but and I mean, this is sort of what I'm thinking about. Just imagine, Americans like, okay, let's just say, okay, you're an American and you published something that was critical of Vladimir Putin. And you happen to be overseas somewhere. You happen to be overseas in, say, in China. And then, the Russians come in and they take you and bring you back to Russia, and you rot in the rest of your life in prison. You're a U.S. person. You're never in Russia. And you said critical things of Vladimir Putin. Now, Vladimir Putin comes back and retaliates against you. And meanwhile, everyone allows this to happen. And that's really where I'm having a hard time here, is everyone is allowing this to happen when there's no jurisdiction. The United States doesn't have, now they're claiming it, and they have claimed it. And I think they get so used to claiming it because everybody goes along. And I think one of the big reasons why they're so used to claiming it is because they've gotten away with citizenship-based taxation, and everybody just assumes that the United States of America could do whatever they want, wherever they want, for whatever reasons they want. So Keith, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You there?
I am. Little dicey.
Yeah.
But
So now your Facebook group is growing again, more and more and more.
Yeah.
American Citizens for Residency-Based Taxations. So my question is what's the sense of people have about Julian Assange on your group? Is this something people are interested in? Do people have a curiosity about this? Do they see the parallels?
I don't know. I don't know if they even think about the parallels. I think that this podcast would be a good, what's the word I'm looking for? A good way to see what the parallels are, but I don't think it's in their realm of thinking. You know what I mean?
Oh, here we go. Yeah, actually, here's a great comment from Sensei Joe. He sees it here. I've been following the Julian Assange case for years, and I was told I'm crazy for stating that Julian Assange and Americans abroad have some things in common. Exactly. Yeah. Because both Americans abroad and Julian Assange are facing, the United States of America expanding its borders of jurisdiction. And that's always been the most absurd thing about citizenship-based taxation. How does the IRS impose jurisdiction over people when it doesn't have jurisdiction over the territory? Now it does, and it does it incredibly clumsily, and it does it for reasons I think are more, related to world domination than raising revenue, to tell you the truth. But this is exactly what I'm seeing, and thank you, Joe, for that. This is exactly right here too, Joe. Julian Assange and Americans abroad face the evils. And here's the word I want to focus on. Here's the phrase I want to focus on, because it's a word that has meaning. U.S. empire. This is what exactly we're talking about. And what we mean by U.S. empire is this. The U.S. empire was something that was thought of as a good idea. Abraham Lincoln was a huge fan of the U.S. empire. What is the U.S. empire? Well, it's the U.S. system. Well, what is the U.S. system? It is taxing your enemies and taking that money and handing it to your friends. That's what it is. It's seizing taxpayer money and handing it to people with a great world. So that's exactly what I see this as well. Thank you very much, Joe. John, do you agree with this at all?
Do I agree with which part of it? You mean Joe's comment, or generally, or
do you agree? Right. Well, do you agree that Julian Assange and Americans abroad face the evils of the U.S. empire?
Well, you put the question that way. Yes, of course. But let's take the emotive language out of it for a minute. What Americans abroad and Julian Assange face is the extraterritorial application of U.S. laws. Okay. that would be the point of overlap, right? And these are and you look at how this stuff is enforced, right? It's enforced through extradition treaties, and one way to view FATCA, actually, which I've often thought, is that FATCA is a form of extradition treaty where information is extradited, right? From the country. But either way, well, I think it's clearly true. Either way, we start off with the principle of the extraterritorial application of U.S. law, which, by the way, I believe is a completely separate question from the legitimacy of using a 1917 law to go after this guy. I mean, you wonder in any normal court whether he'd be convicted or not, but that's a different question. What is extraordinary about this, I mean, this tells you so much about where we are today, because, Julian Assange is going to be more than a footnote in history for sure. But when the history is written here, I consider to be this a watershed moment for both the UK and the United States for different reasons. If the United States follows through with the extradition of Mr. Assange, there is no possible way, under any set of circumstances, from this point on, that the United States will ever be able to claim any sort of moral legitimacy in the world in terms of what it's doing. I mean, the words of Margaret Thatcher, where she claims the United States as the great citadel of freedom and justice, surely have been turned on its head by this. I think the principle is horrible, but going after somebody extraterritorially, through these extradition treaties, which I want to come back to in a second. But the second thing here is that for the UK to go along with this, what it really means that we can document this date or as a marker that on this day in 2024, the UK government and judicial system formally acknowledged that history has come full circle. Well, not full circle, okay, but that the UK is now a colony of the United States, simply doing its bidding. I mean, I find it extraordinary that this is taking place for reasons that have to do with the extradition treaty, obviously. But this is an important day that goes way beyond Julian Assange as a man.
Yeah, I think the consequences of this, where this is going obvious, but this is one of the top trending stories on Twitter today. There's a lot of presentations and people are starting to see what it is, and they're getting together to say, Julian Assange did not start a war. He did not lie, unknown to a whole bunch of people. We saw the footage that was released. We saw the footage of America attacking and killing journalists. We saw that. It's there. We know it. And no one in the United States government is held to account for the crimes that they've done against the world. And rather, they seem to be getting rewarded. And now they're turning it around. And I mean, they put Julian Assange in an incredibly tough place. And it does remind me, I mean, Americans overseas aren't facing the fisc and the difficulty of which to live one's life has been incredibly. The UK will go along with it because of their special relationship. And this is exact. Thank you, Suzanne. This is exactly my point, because we've been discussing over the past few weeks to say, why have all of these European countries abandoned their citizens to say, well, actually, what the United States of America wants, what their tax system wants, what their reporting system wants, it's more important than what you want. and we've been, I've been pitching some various theories as to why that is. But what we can say, it is true. It is true. It is true that we are simply told things that aren't true, and we're told that our government's in our best interest, and we see it that this is simply not true. And for those who dare speak out against it, really face the worst punishments imaginable. Now, John, do you want to talk about the possibility, the legal aspects of this extradition? Because in my mind, I see the obvious problem. I see, and maybe I could do my fish out of water routine with you, and you could help me explain where I'm wrong. So with an extradition, in order to be extradited for a crime, and this is something I've known from doing various tax cases, is that the crime, it has to be a felony in both countries. The country you're in, it has to be a felony in, and the country they want to extradite you in also has to be a felony. So I'm kind of confused here because I'm trying to figure out where the British Espionage Act of 1917 is. Is my analysis wrong or off on this? Is there something I'm missing?
Well, it's of course it's not wrong, okay, but it's not, obviously as precise as perhaps it needs to be here. Let me give you a bit of my understanding of how these so-called dual criminality extradition treaties work, and I think I'm going to use the recent example in Canada to explain it. The first point that I want to make is that extradition treaties actually have nothing to do with what most people think they're about. Most people have this idea that an extradition treaty is used if, somebody creates some heinous crime in the United States and they escape the country and, say to Canada, and then the U.S. goes to Canada and says, please, extradite this person back to the United States. No. It probably, I'm sure it includes that. But since the late 90s, and by the way, President Clinton was very clear about this in some of his public statements about this. The purpose of these extradition treaties is to extend U.S. law into other countries where it doesn't really exist. And I think this is an incredibly important point. I want to give you a couple of examples. Let's start with, you're probably aware of the Chinese telecom lady, Mengwan Zhao, who was arrested at the request of the Canadian government in Vancouver Airport a few years ago. This had to do with violating sanctions against Iran. But I mean, let's look at what's happening here, right? We have a non-Canadian citizen who is alleged to have committed a crime outside Canada, right? And the U.S. going to Canada and saying, we have intelligence that this woman is touching down at Vancouver Airport. Please arrest her under our extradition treaty with you. So, I mean, let's start there because, that's exactly, what's going on, I think, in the UK as well, right? We have somebody who did something, outside the UK, happens to be in the UK. One of the most interesting things about the Brittany Griner case, as you may recall, she was arrested and released in exchange for some Russian prisoner. And there was all this outrage in the United States about, we're giving up this arms dealer in exchange for, this is an unfair trade. Well, that's not how people in the rest of the world see it, because what happened was that this guy was arrested in Thailand at the request of the U.S. government for things that, again, not a Thai citizen. He didn't do anything in Thailand, sort of thing, right? He's just arrested in Thailand under the extradition treaty. Essentially just, people would see it as being kidnapped, right? In Thailand. And brought to the United States. All right, where even the judge in the original trial said it wasn't clear what he'd really done, but so we'll just sentence him to 25 years instead of life, right? So, the problem here is that extradition treaties, rightly or wrongly, people have different views on this, right, are for the purpose of extending the law of the United States outside the United States, okay, into other countries. So, You say, well, sure, there's no Espionage Act in the UK, so how does the US extend the law? Well, it operates like this. You say, well, the UK doesn't have an Espionage Act, so how does this work? Well, if you remember from law school, if you took criminal law or even remember any of it, there's a doctrine of what's called included offenses. So, in other words, take away the label of the offense, look only at the conduct, and ask yourself if that conduct would constitute any kind of crime at all in that other country, right? So, for example, in the Meng Wanzhou case,
Okay.
right, it was, would signing a false statement constitute a crime under Canadian law? Yes, therefore, the provisions of the extradition treaty are triggered, right? Or,
Okay.
does something that Julian is, so that's how these dual extradition, these dual criminality, I think they're called extradition treaties work. And that's all I know about them. But that's enough to see how dangerous these things are. And I think why countries should think long and hard about entering into extradition treaties with the United States. Okay. But in any case, that's where we are. And there's been a lot of talk in the UK. One member of the House of Commons, I can't remember his first name, Davis, has pointed out how the U.S. has continually misused the extradition treaty for commercial purposes in the case of Mr. Lynch, etc., and how it really needs to be amended. And I really think that to extradite Julian Assange under this extradition treaty, it may conform with the text of the treaty, but I don't see how it could have anything to do with the purpose of the treaty, right? But that is where we are, and it is a terrible, terrible problem. Interestingly, the Ansakoulis case, right? The U.S. would not allow the extradition of Ansakoulis to the United States.
So John, so essentially, what you're saying, because as I'm scrolling at the original Espionage Act here, is that it's not that the UK needs to have an exact law, but it needs to have something similar, is what you're saying. It needs to have a law that's sort of similar. Okay, does the UK have a law that's similar to say?
It need not so much a similar law.
Yeah, the only thing is
it has to punish the same conduct, okay, under some kind of law.
Well, and now this is kind of what I wonder: is the same conduct injuring the United States of America? That's sort of what I'm wondering. Is it because would they say, well, it didn't, your conduct didn't, injure Britain, but it did injure the United States of America? And do you see my distinction when I'm saying that is the UK thing? Well, is it something? Hey, look, if you're leaking something about the UK defense, or would they say, hey, look, because the UK is basically a satellite of America, I think, in many, many ways, that they would say, well, you actually injured the United States, and that's a crime. That's a crime in Britain as well. Do you think there'd be an interpretation like that?
I think it's probably much more basic. I don't know exactly what the allegations are against Julian Assange, okay? But as I understand them, it has something to do with accessing classified information, okay? It includes that, right? So, if you have a similar law in Britain that would punish improperly accessing classified information, under these extradition treaties, that's all you need. It doesn't have to be called the same thing. I think there are requirements on, minimum punishments and stuff like that. But
okay,
look,
all right.
The general principle that needs to be understood on this is that the purpose of these extradition treaties is to find a way to extend U.S. law into other countries. Okay, that's the principle that I think gets you where you need to be here.
And likewise, and that's exactly the same thing that and I think that's that we're seeing with the U.S. tax code. It's it's extending the jurisdiction, and removing the tax base from other countries and bringing it to America. And that's and this is what I'd say is that what the United States of America is doing to Julian Assange is completely consistent. It's completely consistent with everything they've been doing. And this is a great case because it's out in the open. And again, it's a top trending topic on Twitter. Hopefully, this will get some attention to the other applications of U.S. law around the world. It's just bizarre. Here it is. Suzanne has the charges here. He was charged with conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. He's hacking into a government computer, a crime that carries a maximum 5-year sentence. And he's been in UK jail.
So this is a very interesting point. Okay, conspiracies are generally much easier to prove, okay, than other types of crimes. In fact, I was listening to a presentation on this yesterday. Okay, more evidence, more kinds of evidence are admissible, etc. But again, the point is that, can you put that comment back up where she said exactly what he was charged with? Conspiracy to do what?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yep.
Yeah, to commit computer intrusion. So what would this mean? Presumably, it would mean that. Now, I think everybody agrees that the information actually came from one Chelsea Manning, right? Okay, at least that's my understanding, and that's what I've read. Okay, so I mean, he didn't do it himself, I think, but the allegation, I guess, is that he made an agreement. At the heart of a conspiracy is an agreement, right? So he made an agreement.
Right, he didn't do it. Now there's allegations. We've seen the evidence of it.
Hmm? That's how they get around.
I think we're experiencing. You know what? I got to say I think we have to apologize. Say we are experiencing some incredibly lagginess today. I think there's something going on in the internet overall here and there. I just want to, this was just a great topic for us, and maybe just the foundation.
Anthony, what
further
we could do is do it later if you want, and just
because
take this one.
Now that I'm thinking about this, we could do another one later when the internet is not our friend today. I see, it's laggy. It's system wide, it appears. So I don't think it's just us. So we could do this a later one. We could revisit it and incorporate a lot of the comments that we've gotten so far. And I think that'd be a better way because this is a huge topic that could really help. And really what I'm trying to do is draw the attention to the abuses of the U.S. tax system. That's the whole point. And what a great story we have, and what's happening to Americans abroad, the abuse, the lack of total government intrusion, and the U.S. government intrusion globally. That's the point that I'm really trying to get across.
Yeah, Anthony. So I think it's important here in this discussion to make it clear that in no way, shape, or form, at least I am not and you're not, okay, trying to equate what is happening to Julian Assange with Americans abroad generally. I mean, that's important, okay? It's the principle, it's what we regard as the illegitimate principle of the extraterritorial application of U.S. law, which is the point of overlap here. All right. And I think it's very important to make that point, because I think that you can have disagreement. I don't know how legitimate the disagreement is, but you can have clear disagreement on whether the prosecution and persecution of Julian Assange is appropriate. Okay, there are plenty of people in the United States who, believe that, he's the devil reincarnate and should be extradited and, whatever.
Of course, right.
So there is disagreement on that. But I think it is impossible for there to be disagreement on the identification of the principle of extraterritorial application of U.S. law, whether it's extradition, whether it's tax, whether it's anything else. Okay, that I think it's pretty hard to disagree with. And that I think has got to be the context of this. Now, you use the word empire. I'd like to do a shout out for a very interesting book that I read a while ago. It's called How to Hide an Empire by Daniel Immerwahr. Okay.
Brilliant title. I love that.
Well, he's a professor somewhere, I think in the Midwest somewhere, but it's a fascinating book. It's a relatively short book, and it can be read by anybody in a day. If you got a travel day or something, you can get it on Kindle. But it really opened up my mind. Of the extent of it. Okay, the extent of it, and how far the territories and the application of law on that extends, outside the continental United States, and how, the way he starts off with the principle that you look at the United States on a map and, it looks like the way it does on a map. But if you look at it in terms of all the stuff it has, it's just, this massive, bunch of stuff all over the world. And it will also identify, I would say a lot of abuses that are similar, the use of people in Puerto Rico for medical experiments. A couple of weeks ago, I saw a very interesting documentary on the nuclear tests in the 50s.
I have to read.
In the Marshall Islands. I don't think that he may or may not go into that in the book, but I mean, you got to understand that what we see as the extraterritorial application of U.S. law may very well, from a U.S. point of view, not be the extraterritorial application at all, but just simply the application of how they see it, their laws to our parts of the world that they control, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting book.
I will absolutely read it, and maybe we'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to keep this discussion, as neutral as possible, right? And focused on where I think it needs to be, the extraterritorial application of the laws, right? And again, to repeat, I mean, anybody who thinks that somehow we're equating the life of Julian Assange with the life of Americans abroad, that's not what's going on here at all, okay? And nor should it be construed that way. But it's the same.
But I'm not saying, but I don't think the Gulf. I'm not sure if the Gulf is that big, because when people are forced to renounce their citizenship, that's pretty bad.
It is very bad.
That's really, really bad. And is that as bad as imprisoning somebody? No, but it's bad.
It's bad. I'm not saying this stuff isn't bad. It's just that there's a certain group of people out there, Anthony, who will say, you must be seriously out of your mind on a podcast to talk about Americans abroad and Julian Assange in the same podcast, right? There's a lot of people who probably would think that. And so I think it's important to keep the focus on the principle that gets you there, and not, the treatment itself. Yes, Americans abroad are treated horribly. Okay. And of course, what's happened to Julian Assange is almost, beyond description, right?
That's really big.
But it's the same person. But listen,
well, hopefully we're drawing some attention to this.
All great powers, try to extend their laws extraterritorial. I mean, the U.S. does it. The genius of the way the United States does it, and things like FATCA, is to get other countries to pick up the cost. China will send, as we all know, its representatives all around the world to bring people back. The Russian opposition leader, who met a rather untimely death last week, if I'm not mistaken, I think they tried to poison him in the UK, right? So, let's not single out the United States for extraterritorial abuses either. Okay. I mean, India, there's a big brouhaha.
There's no one even close. There's nobody close.
You think the U.S. is in the top position,
Yeah.
do you, Anthony?
And I agree with you, John, but there's really no one. Yeah, I mean, there's American exceptionalism, and that's really, I mean, we are exceptional. So
Well,
I'm like, yeah, they do
America
that,
is
but we are really, really
exceptionally
unique
good.
in how
It's
well
exceptionally
orchestrated
good.
it is.
Exceptionally good at extending using its laws extraterritorially. I mean, there is no number two. They're exceptionally
Yeah.
good at it.
Do whatever it wants. Yeah.
But doesn't mean other countries don't.
All right.
Do
Well,
it.
the internet has. John, I do want to end it here, and we'll create a new podcast with this when our internet's a little bit better. So I do want to end it here because it is chopping out, and I don't want to lose our valuable listeners and the problems we've had today. Sensei Joe, I look forward to you reaching out to me because I did watch that Jimmy Dore. The exact episode that you saw. Exactly. And that was fascinating. So when, you put everything in the context, it'll kind of all make sense. So yeah, please email me on that one. But we're going to sign off for now. And if you are watching, I have to, give a shout out to Keith. I know Keith wasn't so vocal today, but if you are considering renouncing or coming into compliance with the U.S. taxes, yeah. If you are thinking of renouncing or coming to U.S. compliance, you can reach out to Keith. He helps out a lot of people. He's not a tax advisor, but he's just a human being who. Keith Redmond, consulate to Accidental Americans, and indicated issues going on. There's no one better than John Richardson. You could reach out to him at citizenships solutions at protonmet.mail. And if you are experiencing some sort of international tax problem that you need some sort of tax resolution to, you can reach out to me, Anthony Parent, at aparent@irsmedic.com as my email, or you could just head over to irsmedic.com offshore to start the process of initiating and reaching out to us, and so we can see how we can help you. So with that, and again,